Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Mr. Thomas. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Can you please introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Okay, I'm Donald B. Thomas, and I have been associated with the acoustical evidence in the Kennedy assassination. I wrote a book about the Kennedy assassination, about the forensic evidence, called Hear No Evil, and I published an article in one of the scientific journals, basically entitled The Acoustical Evidence in the Kennedy Assassination Revisited.
It's a long title.
And my interest in I'm a scientist by trade, and my interest in the Kennedy assassination began after reading several books. And the interest really started with the movie JFK. And then I started reading books and was unsatisfied. I was convinced from reading those books that there was a conspiracy, but I really didn't know what had really happened. And since, as a scientist, I believe that science is the best way to know things, that's when I got really fascinated with the forensic evidence. And here I am, some 30 years later, still interested.
Yeah, it's definitely a consuming topic. I think I keep saying like, oh, I'll get off of that next week. And then I end up finding another document where I end up, 3 weeks goes by and I'm like, holy crap, what happened? But when it comes to the acoustical evidence, every researcher, every person I've talked to about the Kennedy assassination has never touched the acoustical evidence. Could you tell me exactly what is the acoustical evidence? And also what have you learned from doing research into it?
Okay, so I want to start by giving you some credit where credit is due. It's really a researcher named Mary Farrell and another researcher named Gary Mack, who was one of the curators of the Sixth Floor Museum, are the ones that really first developed the acoustical evidence in the sense that they understood that the gunshots were very likely recorded on the police recording system. So it so happens that a few minutes before Kennedy was assassinated, a microphone on one of the police radios on a motorcycle that was with the motorcade, its microphone tripped open. And for the next 8 minutes, it remained open. And from some of those background noises, Gary and Mary realized that it was a motorcycle with the motorcade, because you could hear at one point you could hear sirens in the distance. And in fact, the dispatcher on the radio put out a broadcast in which he said, this was 2 minutes after the shooting, he said, there's a motorcycle up on Stemmons with its mic stuck open. Would somebody find him and tell him to turn it off? Because essentially his open microphone was jamming the broadcast on channel 1, the main police channel. And it was immediately after he makes that broadcast that you can hear the sirens. So the motorcade, the president's motorcade with its 18 motorcycle escort, was on Stemmons Freeway on its way from Dealey Plaza to Parkland Hospital. And that was the clue that made them realize that, other than the fact that there's 18 motorcycles with the motorcade, that it was very likely one of those motorcycles. And since his microphone was open, it probably would have recorded the sounds of the gunfire.
Did it reveal anything? Because I think I've listened to the recording, and what is the most, I guess, traumatic for me, or the most kind of thing that really sticks into my mind, would be the ending where they talk about rushing to Parkland Hospital. Like, you hear the guy stating, like, we're going to Parkland Hospital, headed to Parkland Hospital. And I think I couldn't really pick up a lot of those recordings. It's hard for me to listen to. It's just because maybe it's because my new age ears, looking in from everything right now is already HD quality. So when it's going back in reverse, it's hard for me to pay attention to.
Yeah. All right. So you're not going to hear it at all, because first of all, you're on the wrong channel. Okay, so the police were recording over 2 channels at the same time. They had their primary channel, channel 1, which was used for 24/7 broadcasts, and it was being recorded on a dicta belt. That's the recording that actually has the gunfire. That has the microphone. That's the open microphone that you can hear the motorcycle motor coming along. Channel 2 was an auxiliary channel that was used on this day to support the president's visit, the security detail for the president. Now it's on channel 2 then that you actually hear the broadcast that you mentioned, as that's where Chief Curry, who was driving the pilot car in the motorcade right after the shooting, in the aftermath of the shooting, he starts shouting, "Go to the hospital, officers, go to the hospital, Parkland Hospital." Okay, that's the broadcast you hear. And that's important because that gives you the context of the broadcast, that you can pinpoint in time exactly where the shooting happened on that channel 2 recording. And then you go back to the channel 1 recording, which is where they located the gunshots, and then you synchronize events between the 2 channels, and that's where you find that they line up, that the sounds that the acoustical experts identified as the gunfire is exactly synchronous with the contextual broadcast coming from Dealey Plaza.
So who was the committee, or who was the first person to bring at least these recordings to light, or at least make them noticeable to the public to where you could start being like, okay, there was more than 3 shots that were fired?
Right. So that would have been Mary Farrell, was the first one. She come to find out that, of course, the police were recording their broadcasts. They had them, and they turned over their recordings to the FBI. So the FBI had, and they made copies of them. And some of the Dallas police actually made copies for their own souvenirs, and they were handing those out. And Mary Farrell got a hold of one of those copies, and then she shared it with Gary Mack. Now, Gary Mack had a career in radio before he went over to the 6th floor museum, and so he had taken the tape recording to some of the engineers at the radio station where he had worked, and he had them work to kind of filter out the background, the motorcycle noise, so he could hear what he thought might be gunshots. And he could hear some sounds, and as it turns out, that he was probably just listening to static. But anyway, Gary and Mary were the ones that brought the tapes to the House Select Committee on Assassinations and told them, we believe that the sounds are going to be on these recordings. So the House Select Committee went to the Acoustical Society of America for a recommendation of a laboratory that could analyze the recordings, and they recommended Bolt, Beranek and Newman, a firm up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They're most famous. They had done the Watergate tapes, but they had also done the Kent State shooting tapes. So they listened, and they realized that this little tape recording was a multiple generation copy, and that they really needed the originals. They had to go back and get the original dicta belts recordings that the police had made, and that's what the experts worked with. The problem with the recordings, so when you listen to that recording and you hear the motorcycle motor humming along and you hear various background noises, you do not hear blamity blam blam. You do not hear overtly gunshots, and that's because the recordings are voice grade. So it's like they're not high fidelity. It's like listening to your cell phone. You know, if you heard somebody in somebody's backyard talking on the cell phone firing off firecrackers, you wouldn't hear a really loud bang. And part of the reason is because voice grade recordings are specifically made to narrow down the frequency band to just the bandwidth that covers the frequency of human voices, and most of the bandwidth frequency of a gunshot is outside that range, so it's not being amplified. It's actually there in the background, but it's not amplified as a high fidelity recording would be. So that's one of the reasons why you need acoustical experts to go into the impulses themselves to look for the gunshots. And another reason is because the Dallas radio system was a party line. It's made, you've got like 200 cops out there with radios, and the volume, the power of their broadcasting depends on how close they are to the receivers, and it falls off exponentially. So what that means is you would have, if a guy was close to the receiver, his voice would sound really loud, and a guy was farther away, we could barely hear him. So built into the system is what they call an automatic gain control, which automatically adjusted the volume so that it would amplify low noises, or low voices in this case, and dampen the really strong ones so that they're all into a comfort zone, so that you don't have to sit there playing with your volume. Well, that's going to play havoc with a really loud noise like a gunshot. It just automatically suppresses it. So that's why they had to go into the recording and look for not just a loud noise, which is the muzzle blast of the gun. What they're really looking for is called an echo field, because a gunshot in an urban environment like downtown Dallas, the gunshot is going to reverberate, it's going to resonate, it's going to bounce off of the buildings, and that creates a cluster of impulses, which would be the echo field. And that's what the acoustical experts were looking for.
Now, this is because, like I said, my
You
knowledge.
start to see where, okay, this is why a lot of people stay away from the acoustical evidence, because it gets too technical and too complicated, and they would rather have somebody just tell them, explain it to them, or just tell them what they found, rather than really get into it. And so that's one of the big reasons why people avoid the acoustical evidence.
I like it. It's interesting. I mean, only because I edit audio for the podcast and everything, so I can understand a little bit about frequencies and bandwidth. But it's just so difficult because I'm trying to visualize what that would show up as. Also, if you're looking at a channel frequency, and then trying to find a way, like, because I always hear when people talk about, like, I heard more than 3 shots, or people talk about they heard 4 or 5, and then I've heard the crazy thing where people say that was like 3 shots that were separate, that were against Conley. So you're now counting 6 shots, and it's like, what does that mean? People bring up like suppressors. People bring up that. I don't go that far into it. I don't think that there was suppressors involved. But I mean, if you look at, like, if it was a shot from the 6th floor of a building, is it going to echo? And is that echo going to get picked up? And does that mean that it might be repeating one of these shots that people said they heard multiple of?
Exactly. And in fact, that's one of the things I looked for. It's one of the concerns was that you could have picked up an echo pattern off of the immediate buildings. And then Jim Barger did this analysis, told me that he was also concerned that that whole set of echoes might have gone clear over to the post office, and that whole set of echoes come back a second later, and you'd see another cluster, and it would match. And so that was a concern when they were trying to figure out how many gunshots there were.
Well, do you think there was a shot from the grassy knoll? Do you think that there's a possibility, or do you think that maybe the echo was the cause for people running over to the grassy knoll, thinking that they heard it come from that direction?
No, absolutely, there was a gunshot from the grassy knoll. So the acoustical experts, the first team that did the analysis, BBN, they found 5 clusters. They found 5 suspect sounds. And by that, I mean clusters that look like they could be echo fields of gunshots. And so they went to Dealey Plaza in the summer of 1978, and they fired test shots. So they fired shots from the book depository and from the grassy knoll. And they set out an array of microphones, because an echo field, the number of echoes that you're going to capture is going to depend on how many echo producing surfaces there are close to around near the microphone. And then the juxtaposition of those echoes will depend on the juxtaposition of those surfaces. And so they found these 5 suspect patterns. And so each pattern will vary depending on where your microphone is. That's the main determining factor when I talk about the juxtaposition of these structures, is where it is relative to the microphone. So they set out 36 microphones. So now they've got 36 templates from the gunshot from the grassy knoll. and they've got 36 more, a gunshot from the book depository. So now they've got 72 of these templates. Each of these they know are echo patterns. And then they compared each of those one by one to the suspect sounds that were on the police tape. And so basically, when I say you got a pattern of impulses, so it's like having a broken comb. You've got a set of impulses in a pattern, and you take, so here's your suspect pattern, here's your test pattern, you just overlap them and to see if they matched. And what they wound up with is each of their suspect patterns matched to a test shot. And the fourth one out of the 5 is the one that matched to the gunshot from the grassy knoll.
Okay, so what I guess because I'm trying to factor in because I'm trying to put myself in that time period where I start going, if you just heard 3 shots fired off from, if you want to say, the book depository building, then people are probably freaking out. So they're not going to be paying attention to the 4th or 5th shot. The reason why I say maybe on the 2nd shot, people would probably be freaking out. It just depends on if you consider the first bullet missing completely and going and doing the James Tague one, or you want to consider, I know some people consider that either the first bullet or the 3rd bullet. I consider that probably one of the first 2, just because the 3rd bullet to me seems like it was the headshot one, the one that kind of hit Kennedy and did the explosion of his head. But then if you look at the aspect of multiple shooters, that means the 4th shot might have been a shot that could have hit Kennedy in the head. And then you have this aspect, like I said, it's difficult because, like, I know from doing recordings where the room, everything, a lamp being on, something as simple as that can play into effect. I mean, was all this taken into an account when they jacked up the microphones? I started thinking, how many people were there? Obviously, a person, even if it's not in the, like, obviously in the shot distance, if they're just standing there, that can be a dampening effect as well too. Also, the sun being out. If he was shot at high noon when the sun was at its highest, did they recreate it at the same time period? Also, the vehicles in the motorcade as well too, bouncing off that hard steel that they had, or that metal they had to make the cars.
All that is very true. In fact, you have just the curbstone is going to produce an echo. The ground in front of the motorcycle is going to produce an echo. That's absolutely right. So, and temperature. As a matter of fact, on the day they did the Kennedy was shot, it was 65 degrees. It was in November. And when they did their test shots in August of 1978, it was 80 degrees. So they had to factor in the effect of temperature, air temperature on the speed of sound. And as far as the echoes, yes, it depends on how close the structure is. Like you say, close to the microphone. So a large building can be far away and you can still get an echo, a large echo if it's 1,000 feet away. But then you could have, like you say, a car. If that car is only 20, 30 feet away, that is also that's close enough that that's going to produce an echo. So yeah, those are all factors that they had to factor in. Now the first team, BBN, when they did it, they did their analysis strictly on, okay, we generated these echo patterns, and then here are the suspect sounds, and we just match them up, and we do a statistical analysis and say, okay, it's a 99% match. Okay, and then as far as the people being in Dealey Plaza and hearing things, certainly. In fact, a lot of witnesses, when they first heard the sound, a lot of them said they thought it was just a motorcycle backfire. Some of the witnesses said it startled them, and they kind of jumped, and everybody looked at each other and started laughing because it wasn't any impression.
Well, you said 4 out of the 5 shots were being able to be diagnosed as gunshots or being
no,
significant.
5 out of 5.
5 out of 5? Okay, because I was
5
thinking,
out of 5.
I was like, you have 18 motorcycles. You have this recording coming from a motorcycle. Then, I mean, if you agree with this or not, I don't know. Like I said, everything in the JFK case right now is just controversial. I started to realize, but if the car brakes, if you see those brake lights come on, and then you have immediately this guy step on the gas and go forward, could that be a small backfire? Could one of these motorcycles have been this backfire? I mean, people talked about hearing a backfire, talked about hearing firecrackers, just things where it realized, like, if you look at the angle of Dealey Plaza and how it's set up, I mean, it's not it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's like a wind tunnel, but it's definitely got to create a lot of echoes and a lot of weird reverberations of things. I mean, was it, if there was shots from the book depository building, which I agree that there's shots from the book depository. Now, who did them? I don't know. But if there are shots coming from there, they people didn't run to the book depository building. Where people started to run was the grassy knoll. So you have this weird influx here.
Actually, both. The people, it was mostly the people on the far side of the plaza that ran into towards the grassy knoll. You remember one of the policemen that was in the motorcade, he testified his distinct impression was it was coming from the book depository in front of him. This is Officer Baker, then actually ran into the book depository looking. But you're absolutely right. One thing, for example, was the railroad bridge at the end. That railroad bridge is just bound to produce some sort of an echo. So one of the things that the acoustical experts did is they sent a team to Dealey Plaza, and what they did is they set up an experiment. There were 3 guys, and they had a map because other people had plotted this out. They had plotted where witnesses were standing and where those witnesses had the impression the shots came from. And in that study, it showed that people who were at the west end of the plaza were the ones that generally thought gunshots came from the grassy knoll, whereas people who were down the east end of the plaza, they were the ones that were thinking shots came from the book depository because they were respectively closer to those different sources. So what they did for this experiment was they fired gunshots they'd fire one shot, they'd fire from the grassy knoll, for example, and these 3 guys had themselves arrayed at different places in the plaza, and they immediately recorded their impression as to where they thought the shot came from, specifically looking for these strange echo effects. And then they moved, and they spent the day circling around as they fired a shot and writing their impression as to where they thought the shots came from. And at the end of the day, it was very clear. It didn't matter where you stood. A gunshot from the grassy knoll sounded like it came from the grassy knoll, and a gunshot from the book depository sounded like it came from the book depository. The wild card in that is the sequence of gunfire. Is that if you have gunshots that are very close together, depending on where you are standing, you may not hear 2 separate shots. You might just hear it as one shot. So it's another thing. As that experiment was done with discrete gunfire. Okay, it did not take into account what would happen if you had shots, really close together. And like you say, the first shot, people are standing there in Dealey Plaza, they're not expecting anything. So all they hear is a blam. They're probably not going to register where the shots are coming from or even how many until after they've heard a couple. And then they start registering, okay, it sounds like it's coming from here or there. That's why you get a lot of difference among the different witnesses as to how many shots they heard and where they thought they came from.
Yeah, there was always whenever I heard a witness statement, and some people, I guess it would be so different from the ones that the Warren Commission accepted. People would say, "Oh, it's either that's obviously conspiracy, or that's obviously that person's lying." And I go, "Okay, well, maybe they're just not hearing it right." I mean, there's a thing called frequency from like a radio that you get, and I worked at a hotel for a long time. I had a radio in my pocket. I wouldn't be at work. I'd be at home sitting and watching TV, and I would hear like someone was calling my name on the radio because I had been so used to it all day, every day. It just got ingrained into my head where I was hearing things that necessarily weren't there. And we know the mind can mistake certain things and certain ideas. But when it comes to the recreation of the shots, that experiment that they did setting up all those microphones, did it actually help the investigation, improve anything, or did it really just make maybe a hindrance? Like, were they going at it thinking that there was conspiracy? Were they going at it with an open mind, trying their best to recreate it? Like, or were they just trying to, agree with the official narrative on things?
No, they were completely open. They were trying to figure out what the science would tell them. And this is why if you get a chance to read, Jim Barger was the lead expert on it when he testified in the acoustics, and they were trying to pin him down, and he was keeping within the science, and he was telling them, they wanted him to tell them for sure, absolutely straight out, there was a gunshot from the grassy knoll. And he's going, well, he said, I can tell you, I've got this impulse on the recording that if that is a gunshot, it came from the grassy knoll. He was very, he was very careful to stay within the science. So, yeah.
So I think it's amazing to me because, like, from what I've heard, I mean, people have always just said 3 shots or that there was more than 3 shots, but we could distinctly find out that there was at least 5 shots fired on that day. I mean, and then if you even bring up the idea of a front shot or something like that, some people will just roll their eyes, or some people would say, yeah, but they couldn't tell you if it came from, a lot of people would suspect the grassy knoll. And I mean, it makes sense, but I'm just trying to picture myself in that scenario where I'm like, man, I could easily, whether we classify 5 shots being in there, I mean, how many weird sounds did they pick up on that thing that they could maybe funnel if it was a shot, or funnel if it was something else?
Well, or for example, all right, they had those 5 distinct impulse patterns. Just before, sort of guilt by association, there was another smaller pattern. It wasn't as deep. It did not have as many impulses as the others. These other impulses. Now, when I talk about numbers of impulses, one of the limits to this is you got the motorcycle noise that's in your background. So they're only counting impulses that were loud enough that they rise up above that background, that threshold of motorcycle noise. So each of these suspect impulses had in the neighborhood of 10 or 12 impulses rising above the motorcycle noise. There was one short pattern that had only 4 impulses. And so they looked at that one and they thought, okay, if these others are rifle shots, then this one probably isn't. That one, maybe it's a pistol. Maybe it's a motorcycle backfire.
Well,
Maybe it's a firecracker.
think about the amplification of being on a 6th floor building that high up and firing a rifle. Not necessarily, it wasn't a condensed thing, but it was kind of more blasted out in a kind of a direction. If you're shooting from a window, I mean, it's blocking off the sound at a halfway point from where the barrel is. So it's just going to bounce off either the building walls that you're shooting out of, and it's going to project out. So those will be the highest spikes. But then when you have a shot from the grassy knoll, that's not amplified by anything but just the air. I mean, unless they're saying it was the same rifle. I mean, can they tell the distinctive difference between a book depository shot and the grassy knoll? And could that clarify if there was the same exact rifle? Like, were they both Manly Carcanos, or were this maybe one of these Mausers that they talked about?
Right. Okay. Well,
I'm getting into it. You see me? I'm getting into it.
so many, it kicks up so many thoughts. So one of the things you talked about with the book depository window, for example, was some of the witnesses said they could actually see that the rifle was sticking out the window. They could actually see that. One guy said it looked like a pipe, so he could see it. Others said it looked like he was back. So when they did their test shots, they did it both ways. They had it with the gun sticking out the window, the muzzle, and they had it with the muzzle sticking in the window. They did it both ways. They also fired a pistol. A lot of people don't realize that they actually fired a pistol shot, and they included that in their testing. Now, when it comes to, can you tell a book depository from a grassy knoll? Yeah, do I want to get into that now? Okay, well, let me back up. Okay, as far as being able to tell the caliber of the rifle, yeah. In fact, the way they can tell the caliber of the rifle is because of what's called the shockwave precedence. Because when a gunshot, when you fire the muzzle blast, there's a second noise, and that's the noise made by the bullet. So if you're downstream, if you're in the line of fire, you're going to actually hear the bullet first. Yeah, they say you never hear the gun that killed you, right? But you can hear a bullet whiz by, and that's the shock wave of the bullet, and then you'll hear the blast. All right. And they train people, if you're in the Army, if you're under fire by a sniper, you can estimate how far away the sniper is by the lag time between when you hear the bullet go by and then when you hear the muzzle blast. So the greater the amount of time between them, then you know, well, that sniper is way far away from me if there's a long lag. And you can get a guess as to where the guy might be hiding just because of that lag. So it so happens that on the recording of the grassy knoll shot, there is the muzzle blast, and there's also preceding it is the shock wave of the bullet. And so by that shock wave precedence, in fact, in the testimony of one of the acoustical experts, they asked him that question. They said, "Can you tell us what the caliber of the rifle is by the acoustical signature?" And he said, "Yes, I can do that, but I'd rather not."
Huh?
And they said, "Well, that's a strange answer. Why would you rather not?" And he says, "Because I can tell the caliber of the rifle by knowing the trajectory." And he said, that gets into issues that are non-acoustical experts I don't want to get into. And what he's talking about is he knows the trajectory because it went from the grassy knoll to President Kennedy's head. He knows exactly what the trajectory is. But the House Select Committee was saying, oh, the shot missed if it came from the grassy knoll. So they're blowing it off. So how do you do that? How do you know? How can you count knowing the trajectory? How does that tell you what the caliber of the rifle is? Well, it's exactly what I was saying. It's by the shockwave precedence. And because I thought about this and I said, okay, well, I can't tell what the gun trajectory is. I can't tell what the caliber is because I need to know how far away the guy is. Thought, oh shit, I know how far away he is. I know the trajectory. So then the difference is going to be the speed of the bullet. Okay, the speed of the bullet, then that gets back. You can just go to a shooter's Bible, and it will give you the muzzle blast, the muzzle speed, muzzle velocity of different guns, and you can just work backwards from the distance and calculate how long it took that bullet to get from where it was fired to where Kennedy's head is, and calculate the velocity of the bullet. And then it's just a question of going shooter Bible and look it up, and there it is, 30-30.
When it comes to the grassy knoll shot, now, were there anything in any of these recordings that seemed a little bit different, like something, because I know people talk about damage to the motorcade vehicle. So I mentioned, does any of these sound like a bullet hitting one of these motorcade vehicles? I know, like we talk about 5 shots being diagnosed. I don't think necessarily, obviously, we know James Tague bullet, but I don't think all 5 shots made their mark. And then I've talked about the front windshield looked like a bullet had hit it. And what I looked at it, I know it's safety glass and I know it's probably tougher than real glass, but the damage to it, it's not a big enough hole for a bullet, but it looks like something definitely hit the windshield. And I just can't tell. It doesn't look like it's getting hit out. What it looks like it's something hit the front. And I mean, I would consider that would be the front shot, because if you talk about Kennedy's little, neck wound thing, I consider that a fragment that somehow went into his throat. Maybe it hit and then the bullet kind of separated after it hit the windshield. It didn't have enough force to go through it. But I think a lot of people, especially the general public, knew that this glass or those bubble top things, they weren't bulletproof, but a lot of people assumed that they were.
Right. Yeah, the bubble was not bulletproof. It might have deflected something, but yeah, no, yeah. To directly answer your question, no, you don't pick up any sound as far as it hitting the street or it hitting the windshield or anything like that. Uh, that's when you go to the video, and that's where you really get you find that the acoustical evidence is valid as you start comparing the acoustical evidence to the video evidence, because you've got a very close match, because in the Zapruder film, basically you see 3 wounding episodes. You see Kennedy, Kennedy reacts, and then Conley, the bullet went through his chest, and then you see Kennedy's head burst as the bullet strikes him. You see those three episodes. Only 2 of those is where you actually see the impact of the bullet actually going through it. When Kennedy was doing this, he was responding. You don't actually see the impact itself. But of course, when you see his head burst, that's from an impact of a bullet. And when you see Conley's lapel flap out just before he contorts and falls over, and he throws his wrist up, the time lapse between those 2 events on the Zapruder film is exactly 4.8 seconds. And if you go to the audio tape, the time lapse between the 3rd shot, which came from the book depository, and the 4th shot, which comes from the grassy knoll, is also exactly 4.8 seconds. So you get synchrony between the audio tape and the video.
So the audio or the acoustical evidence is not a fan of the Zapruder film alteration people.
No,
Okay. So
definitely not.
the Zapruder film was, I've heard people either say that they were agnostic on it or they say that it was altered. I get it with the frame jumps, makes sense. But I mean, either way, it's like it's a pretty damning film, whether it's altered or not. Like it shows a pretty good picture of what happened that day, whether you agree if it was a back explosion or whether you agree it was just, the whole pop of the top. Like I said, I don't know, but when they colorize it and they do all these things to it, it just obviously it seems like it's helping a little bit, but to me, it's like it is like I don't know what the technology was back then to be able to do that.
Yeah, they registered. They're using registering on the enhanced version. So yeah, I mean, it's legit. And besides, well, it does make sense. Why would you suppress a film for 8 years that you doctored? I mean, if you doctored it for some reason,
Nothing about the Kennedy assassination makes sense.
yeah, that's pretty darn clever for me. If you did both,
Did it
so
did it ever answer the question to why people heard shots from the fourth floor, the third floor, the second floor, and the first floor, but they didn't hear it on the fifth?
okay. So most criminologists will tell you that the least reliable form of evidence is eyewitness testimony.
Yeah, that's true.
That is normal for for eyewitnesses to be all over the map. And I'm not saying eyewitness testimony is worthless. And guy says I saw an elephant. Okay, yeah,
Usually it's war victims or someone who's been in war who's experienced extreme stress that have the best witness encounters.
yeah. Oh, yeah. But yeah. So as far as hearing the number of shots, like Jackie Kennedy, right there, I think she said she heard one shot. That's all she heard. But her memory's obviously been altered.
I
So
mean, yeah, she saw her husband's head explode right beside her. That would probably freak the hell out of
yeah.
anybody.
People don't have a recorder in their head. Like I say, and as far as number of shots, it can vary depending on your juxtaposition to the different firing positions and the order in which you're being fired. So hard to put much stock into that kind of thing. Like I say, people are all over the map. Some 4, some 6, some 2.
Did you ever feel at any moments that you were having faults or doubts about the acoustical evidence? I just find myself, maybe it's because I'm a young researcher, but looking through the case, and there are times I'm like, maybe it was a lone nut. Like I try and ground myself with the idea there's obviously more than one shooter, but it's just the way you end up reading and getting funneled in one direction. You get so convinced into like, okay, maybe this is how it happened, and I'm wrong.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind about the acoustical evidence because the way there's so many lines of evidence that converge. So what I didn't get into that maybe we should talk about is in the case of the first laboratory, the BBN folks, where their studies I talked about, where they're just matching up impulses from their test shots to the suspect impulses on the recording. It was not just the matching procedure, that scientific part, that convinced them. It was the actual order in the matching data. And by that, I mean that the first suspect sound on the recording matched to a test shot that was recorded at a microphone that was on Houston Street right next to the intersection. So to make that a little clearer, there are 36 microphones in the array that went from Main Street down Houston Street to the intersection and then back up Elm Street towards the grassy knoll. And if I number those from 1 to 36, it was on the 17th microphone that got the match to the first sound on the police tape. The second sound on the police tape matched to a test shot at microphone 18, right at the intersection. And then the third shot matched at microphone 19, which is now on Elm Street, right at the intersection. So 3 microphones in a row got your matching shots. And then the fourth shot is 80 feet down at microphone 24. And then your fifth shot matched at microphone 25. So the microphone topography is in a sequence, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sequence, just as if you were moving along through Dealey Plaza. There's only that's 1 out of 120. If these sounds on the police tape were not the gunshots, if there were any other sound and you just got a spurious match, then they would just match at a microphone here, a microphone there, a microphone anywhere. but these are in line. And it's not only the sequence, but it's also the spacing, because on the police tape, the first 3 shots are about a second apart. It's a little fraction more than 1 second apart. So they're blam, hippopotamus, blam, hippopotamus, blam. And then there's a 5-second gap and blam, blam. Now they're about 7/10 of a second apart. So the spacing of the matching microphones exactly matches the spacing in time that's on the police tape. And it's not only the spacing, but it's also the trajectory, because the separation, the distance from the first matching microphone to the 5th matching microphone was 130 feet. And the amount of time between the first shot and the 5th shot was 8.3 seconds. Well, you do the math on that, it works out to a speed to cover 130 feet, and 8.3 seconds works out to about 11 miles per hour. Well, the FBI, studying the Zapruder film, said that the motorcade was moving at 11.3 miles per hour. So that's that order in the matching data that they found, not just the fact that they matched, but that they're in a sequence that would rule out just false positives. That's why the BBN concluded, yes, the gunfire that killed President Kennedy was recorded on the police tape. But then when the question was, okay, how sure are you that one of those came from the grassy knoll? Okay, that's when they back up and go, well, if that is a gunshot, it came from the grassy knoll, kind of a thing. Yeah, that's when it got into the question, could it be a false positive, in the sense that it might not be from the grassy knoll, it might be from someplace else, not necessarily, but these are the gunshots that the Kennedy gunfire is recorded on the recording. So then it was left up. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I'll say, so the evidence that we have that there was 5 shots and a shot came from the grassy knoll, but the whole issue with the way that the acoustic evidence is now being treated was that if they entertain the idea that a shot came from the grassy knoll, or they go into that, that means that there was obviously more than one shooter, which goes against the official narrative that Oswald killed the president.
Exactly.
Fucking
Right.
difficult to understand, man. Because I mean, I'm trying to examine this where I'm like, that rifle, obviously, you had to cock it, you had to load it. And they say that at the number of shots that he fired in that amount of time, if it was just one shooter, is impossible for the
That's
reloading and
right.
doing all that. So then I go, if we look at the 3 shots that were closest, the 17th microphone, the 18th microphone, and the microphone right beside that, and then you examine the far away 2 shots, that means, was it one shot from the rifle, then it was a shot from over there, then it was back to the 18 microphone, and then it was another shot over there. So it was a back and forth, and that's why people say it looked like Kennedy was caught in a crossfire.
Exactly.
Damn.
So, okay, so the rifle, the fastest they could fire it was 2.25 seconds to actually cycle the rifle. Okay, pull the trigger, reload, pull it again. 2.25 seconds was the fastest anybody could fire it. Okay, so that rules out that those 3 shots, the first 3, which are, I think, is about 1.5, 1.1 second between each one. So that means the 3 shots came from the book depository. It's the first shot, it's the 3rd shot, and then it's the 5th shot. And that means it's the 2nd shot and the 4th shot that comes from someplace else. And the 4th shot is one that matches to the grassy knoll.
And that would explain, because if you talk about the motorcade moving at 11 miles per hour, then obviously speeding up towards the 5th shot, where the 5th shot's so far away, is that shot came from the rifle, because at that point they already hit the gas and they were trying to rush away from the scenario. So that's why the bullet's the farthest.
Well,
No,
not exactly.
I was on a roll for a little bit.
That's a little more detail. That's it's stretching a little bit more beyond what the evidence we have. So the 11 miles per hour would have been the average speed of the motorcade. So the car was speeding up. When he came around at the intersection, the car slowed down to was only going about 5 miles per hour, and then it sped up. At the time that he actually, when the shots were fired, it had achieved a speed of about 13 miles per hour, and then the guy hit the brake, and the speed almost instantly dropped in half. It dropped down to about 8 miles an hour. So when we talk about 11 miles per hour, that's like the average speed over the whole sequence. The car itself, yeah, it was speeding up and slowing down.
Did so the stop that he had, people said he stopped for at least 5 seconds. Is that real or is that not real?
The no, the car
Yeah.
on Elm Street, no, he didn't stop.
When he was
No, he
when I'm about to say, I thought I heard when he approached that stop sign that the car stopped for at least 5 seconds, you know.
no, people are saying that stop sign. Okay, no, they had the Secret Service had gone ahead and had removed they turned off the stoplights. Secret Service rule was that the car was never supposed to go slower than about 20 miles per hour. First of all, you're supposed to be a moving target at all times. So the Secret Service had patrolled the route and made sure all the stoplights were turned off. And in fact, they had a rule that the pilot car was supposed to be at least 200 feet ahead of him, so that if anything happened where something like they fire gunshots had started or somebody attacked the limo, that they were not boxed in. They were always had the opportunity to speed up and get out of trouble. But no, the slowest the car ever dropped, once it made that turn, he dropped their speed to about 5 miles an hour, and then it was going to about like I say, he hit a speed of about 13, and then immediately he hit the brake. So and that's why you see just during the sequence where Kennedy was just before he shot, if you watch it in slow motion, you see everybody in the limousine, they lurch, they go like that at the instant where right about frame 300 is where the guy hit the brake and slowed everything down. That's one of the mistakes they make. They say that Kennedy was going forward, but he was going forward beginning at frame 300. He and everybody in the car just kind of lurched forward a little bit when the guy hit the brake, and then everybody else continued forward except Kennedy when he was struck in the head, and then his head snapped backward, which is why I say you didn't need the acoustical evidence. when
Yeah.
you see his head snap backwards, and you look at the autopsy evidence, yeah, he was shot from the front.
Well, I had Dr. Gary Aguilar really dismiss that jet theory or whatever they call
Yeah,
it.
the jet propulsion, right? Yeah,
That just never makes sense. I mean, at the angle, you don't just go like back like that. That's obviously someone hit you from the front. And I think a lot of people jump on like the speculation. Obviously, the Secret Service was involved because he slammed on his brakes. I go, first of all, when you're in a situation, you just hear a loud bang. Your first reaction is turn around and check the president or do whatever that is. And that's when people are yelling at him to go, don't stop, go. And
right.
I think you have to keep a lot of these factors in. Like, you don't know what type of situation that is. You don't know what you're hearing. That's what always, it's probably a good question to ask you, which is when you're looking through the acoustical evidence recording, is it eerie to you? Does it, like, before you even heard it, before you even looked into that, just your knowledge beforehand? I don't know if you can remember what you were thinking before that, but did it correct anything? Did it solidify anything? And then how eerie is it got to be for you to listen to that? To me, it's eerie. When I hear him scream, get to Parkland Medical, get to the hospital, that to me, I get chills up my back. And it's just like,
Right.
imagine if you had a recording in the actual car to hear their conversation before that all happened.
Right. Yeah. My first impressions actually was anger. There are times I get just spitting angry at the thought of somebody shooting somebody like this in broad daylight, and then worse, the way it was covered up. There were times I'm pretty much past that now, but I'd say for about the first 10 years that I was working on this case, I had very, very strong emotional reactions to it. I guess in a way it invigorates you. You really want to get down into it and see the details and try to figure this stuff out. So
Well, I think it's important to get the general public. That's why I'm so interested in every aspect of this case, because I was attracted to the medical evidence at first. And then I just, at this point now, I'm interested in every single part of it because all of it's, I mean, I hate to say it's like dessert, but all of it's like everything you can just really raise a flag at. And the idea that it could be so case closed to me, I just kind of like, snort out my nose, whatever. It's just, it's ridiculous to me. But I mean, I get it. I think there's, there's a lot of obviously like researchers and stuff that do add on a little bit, maybe to sell a book or something, which makes it very, very difficult. But I'm on board with doing anything as possible to just either get the truth out there or just get enough people interested into it. Like I don't do this because I'm, it's it's the best thing in the world to investigate. To me, I'm just like, dude, there's an obvious huge issue right here. We need to figure out what this issue is. And that issue, people always talk about November. That day was a day that was a turning point in history where everything you could mark it back to that day.
That's true. And one of the big issues where people have asked me and they look back on it, especially younger people, they go, well, it's so long ago, who cares? I mean, what difference?
Show me, I'll punch them.
Yeah. What difference does it make? And I go, well, part of it isn't just because a guy was killed and they got away with it. It's because how it was covered up and how the people in government were able to steer public opinion to their own ends. As they say, if you don't learn history, you're doomed to repeat it. And that's the important lesson you need to learn is how information is controlled. And the Kennedy assassination is an exemplar of that.
When it comes to the public being aware, like magazines being aware of like you mentioned a interview or you mentioned a recording that was played on a news station. Now, this acoustical evidence, how long did all of this take till it started to come to light? It wasn't immediately after the assassination. I'm guessing it was probably like 10 years later or so. Like it took the Zapruder film a while to finally get shown on Geraldo Rivera show.
Right. Well, yeah, as I said, Mary Farrell, she got it within the first year or so of the assassination, where cops were passing out souvenirs. Gary, I'm not sure Gary ever told me exactly when he took it, when he got a copy and was having it analyzed, but it was in 1978 that he took it to the House Select Committee, and so it was 1978 that they actually did the analysis. So that's like 15 years
I know
after the assassination.
people ask the question like, okay, well, if Oswald didn't do it, then who did? And I mean, that we'll never know that answer. There was not an investigation to find who killed the president. It was an investigation of here's Oswald, he killed the president. We're going to show you how. You lost him after that day. In my opinion, it was that day. Like I tried to look at the media of what happened in Dallas that day. And I think there were honest reporting going on. And then you just slowly start seeing all of their things that they said originally change. Now, there is speculation I don't agree with. There was speculations about different types of rifles when it was happening. They were talking about Kennedy still being alive at the hospital. And it was like a couple hours later, they said, oh, no, he's pronounced dead. They ordered a priest there and everything. But that day of reporting, those people talking about it live in that moment when it happens, I go, this is probably the only time you're ever going to get honest information out of any of this. Because after we know about 1035, 960, that statement the Warren Commission gave to magazines to label things conspiracy. And then with so much time, it took 1970 something. You're getting recordings, you're getting films now that are showing it in a different way. It's good to spark up interest again, but it sucks because in that moment is when you needed that stuff. You needed to prove and you needed that investigation closed in a matter of 5 or 6 months, not going on for almost 60 years.
Yes. And that's right. And most of the people that were involved are dead by now. So a big part of it is still getting the documents that are left. And over the years, we've sorted out things that the Warren Commission knew that we didn't know that they knew, and that the FBI knew, and we didn't know that they knew. And a lot of it has to do with one thing is the Tippet murder and Tippet's involvement. And there were definitely some cops that were complicit in helping Oswald to escape. And there was the gun running ring that was operating in Dallas that the Warren Commission was briefed on it, kept it all secret, that Jack Ruby was involved with, and local CIA people were involved with. That was all kept secret. And so now those things are starting to fall together. And so we have a kind of a broad outline. And in fact, so the way the Warren Commission worked was, they hired all these prosecuting attorneys and then divided them into teams and told them, okay, so here's your job. You look at Jack Ruby, and your team, you look at the crime scene evidence and they divided into teams. In one of the teams, and then each team produced a report, and then each report became a chapter in the Warren Commission. That's how basically the Warren Report came to be written. Well, one of the teams was assigned to look at Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in the weeks and months before the assassination. And when they got that report, that was written by Coleman and Slauson, and that report went right into the circular file, and that's the missing chapter. And they kept that one secret for a long time. And finally, when that chapter, that report finally surfaces, and then you can see they had figured out the outline of what had happened. So even then, so like you say, it was in the moment, in those first months, that first year of investigation, that was your chance to solve it. So, and they had a pretty good picture in there of what had really happened. So
I'm not.
they just kept the secret for 50 years.
I knew about the gun running and like the ring that was going on. I just didn't know the Warren Commission knew about it.
Yeah, that was kept out too. The ATF agent who was actually the one who busted them, he debriefed the Warren Commission. He told them what had happened, so they knew about it.
There's certain things I can understand when it comes to the case. Like, if you look at Jack Ruby, that was where I found my fascination, especially, mostly because, if you look at who his psychiatric guy was, his Luis Joylon West, and Luis Joylon West happened to be the guy that administered him a flu shot. But then immediately Jack Ruby starts going crazy. If you look him up on the internet, I don't know how much you know about him, but if you look him up on the internet, what he's labeled for is LSD interrogations for Viet or Korean war veterans. It's basically making them forget what happened over there, because there was a time period we thought we used biological weapons when we weren't supposed to. It was against the Geneva Code, but we did it. And these people were brainwashed into saying that what happened was they thought they were brainwashed by the Koreans, and really they re-brainwashed them to forget that we used biological weapons over there. And this guy, his name is Luis Joylon West. If you look him up, he says it works for the CIA, picked up for hypnosis and LSD interrogations. It's on his Wikipedia. You can check that. So I went to the CIA website. I go, he worked for the CIA. He's labeled as that. You got to have a file on him. No file. So what I do is I found Jack Ruby's psychiatric records, and stamped at the bottom right of every single document is Luis Joylon West. Now, he was friends, and Tom O'Neill, I don't know if you know who he is. He wrote a book about the Manson murders. The same therapist for Jack Ruby before he goes crazy is the same therapist for Charles Manson. So it's tied into MK Ultra, and this is when it kind of gets into more conspiratorial dark territory. We know about MK Ultra from the receipts that they kept at a warehouse, which how we know it's real. But Alan Dulles was in charge of that program, not only in charge of it, but when his son came back from war with a brain injury, he signed his son up to do the program, and it did not go well at all. It went horrible. But he was in charge of that, and that's the thing, is that when they gave Jack Ruby that last psychiatric exam before he went nuts, nobody, the judges, anybody doing the trial, anybody on the Warren Commission, anybody on any of these reports had no idea that that was a guy working for MK Ultra, because it was so top secret. They didn't need to know, or they would have never gave him that psychiatric appointment with that guy. And that's what I'm saying is, like, when you look at the documents from the FBI, and I found the most beneficial stuff, not even on the archives. I looked at Harold Weisberg's archives. I looked at Malcolm Blunt's, but what I found is more beneficial. The NSA.gov, go to their website. They have things that aren't listed on the JFK library at all. And there are things about the FBI and the CIA, like documents, like they have a file on Oswald saying he's Central Intelligence. Apparently, a lady from a research review board submitted a request to the CIA saying, where's the file for Oswald? He was debriefed by an agent named Demencia, but we have no file about them. They go, we don't know what you're talking about. So then they send the interview of Demencia, where Demencia says, I know what a debrief is. That was a debrief. What I did was a debrief. The CIA said, okay, we found a file about Oswald. Before they said there wasn't. This is about, like, you have to think of the time span of sending letters. This is probably about 8-month time period. Towards the end of it, they go, we do have a file on Oswald, but we never classified that as a debrief. They're not lying. They just didn't. You asked for a debrief. They don't classify that as a debrief. So it's like, it's legal speak, kind of.
Yeah. Well, it was listed on the registry as a debrief, and then it was gone. This is okay. So this guy, he debriefed him. What? And this was in Copenhagen.
This was,
And
he
he
said,
came out.
I don't remember exactly where he came out, but I remember him saying what he did was he gave a description of a person from like the 19 something that worked at a radio factory in Minsk, and it fit
Yeah,
Oswald's
working.
description.
Oh yeah, yeah, right, yeah. Oh yeah, that guy. Yeah, he was interviewed by the House Select Committee. Right. Yeah.
So there was just a lot of stuff where it was like you look at these documents, and it's kind of like when you file a thing for the Freedom of Information Act. When you file a thing for the Freedom of Information Act, you got to get that time period and that date exactly right. Like it's got to be a point to where like you go, hey, between the weeks of like March and between the weeks of like December, did you guys do anything crazy? They're gonna be like, you have to be more specific than that. And then, but if you request the exact day and the exact time, they give it to you because obviously they know what it is and the document exists.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
they got it.
what I found interesting is the 1035 960 form, that Warren Commission statement. I've been saying it wrong. It's 1090. Well, it's 1035, but what I was saying was 1095. If you type in 1095 360 and you type in CIA after it, there's a 6-page document on the human brain where they show a model of the human brain, and they're talking about astral projection. They're talking about temporal experience. They're talking about ways to manipulate and hypnosis somebody. And I'm just like, look, man, I'm telling you, dude. Like to me, I just go, I don't know what else to say about our government, but they're up to some funky stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
But Donald, I seriously appreciate you giving me your time and being able to talk on my show, man. And I'm letting me vent a little bit about the JFK topic. Like I said, it's good. I like talking about it. I bet you, after so long working in it, you probably still like talking about it, but it probably gets to be too much sometimes.
So I'm still interested. Like I say, I'm still learning every time. I learn more every time I talk to somebody, crack open another book. Yep.
Well, I'm going to link all your links in the description. Is there a place that people can find you at? Do you have a place like Amazon or something where someone can come across your book, Hear No Evil?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, but it's out of print now. So the price has gone through the roof. You can still get you can pick up on eBay, place like that. You can get it for a reasonable price used. And then I guess the ebook, and what do they call that? The voice book or whatever.
Oh, Audible recording.
The audio, yeah, the audio book is pretty reasonable price, like $20 or something.
Do you
So,
have a
but Amazon,
do you
just
have a
go to Amazon and hear no evil.
do you have a Facebook or Twitter?
No.
Okay, fair, good. That's probably a good thing. Facebook and Twitter tends to be a horrible place sometimes.
Yeah, I
Um,
dumped the Facebook. Uh, I, they pissed me off.
well, look, I appreciate you for giving me your time. I'm going to link all your links in the description. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.